What would you do if your child's life was on the line? Some parents would protect them at all costs. But what if protecting them meant making a choice so dark, so twisted, that it could destroy their soul forever? In this story, a mother did the unthinkable. She hired strangers to take her own son, not for money, not for revenge, but to save him from the consequences of his actions. What she did not realize was that her desperate plan would spiral into a nightmare worse than anything she could imagine. Her son disappeared into a hidden world of secrets, fear, and unimaginable cruelty. And years later, the truth came back in the form of a letter that would haunt her until her last breath. Stay with us until the end, and you'll discover the shocking confessions, the horrifying twists, and the brutal price of one mother's attempt to protect her child. A choice that left everyone questioning what love really means. She found the receipt in the pocket of her winter coat 3 days before the trial. It was folded into a thin, almost weightless strip, the kind of paper people forget the moment they hand over the money. The ink had already begun to fade, but one word was still legible: rope. She stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment, coat half off her shoulders, keys still in her hand, and tried to remember when she had bought it. She remembered everything else. She remembered the first time her son, Daniel, had cried in his sleep, whispering a name she did not recognize. She remembered the exact pattern of freckles on his left shoulder. She remembered the sound of his breathing when he was sick, the shallow rhythm that had once convinced her he might die before morning. But the rope did not exist in her memory. She searched the apartment slowly, methodically, as if looking for a stranger who might be hiding inside her life. In the closet, she found it. A coil of new rope, still stiff, still smelling faintly of the hardware store. No tag, no explanation. For a long time, she simply stared at it. Then she put it back, closed the door, and went to wake her son. Daniel was asleep on his back, arms spread wide, as if he had surrendered to the bed. He was 19, but in sleep he still looked younger, the sharp angles of adulthood softened into something fragile. In 3 days, he would stand in a courtroom in downtown Chicago and listen as strangers decided how many years of his life should be taken away. They said he had beaten a man nearly to death. She had seen the photographs. She had not asked him to explain. That silence was her first betrayal. She made coffee and waited for him to wake up. When he finally came into the kitchen, hair uncombed, eyes still blurred with sleep, she watched him as if she were studying a document she might never see again. "Did you sleep?" she asked. He nodded. She did not ask if he dreamed. They ate in silence. Outside, the city was already awake, buses groaning at the corner, sirens weaving through traffic. Everything continued, indifferent to the fact that her life was narrowing toward a single day. After he left for his meeting with the public defender, she took the receipt from her pocket and unfolded it again. Rope. She remembered the phone number. It had been given to her in a parking lot behind the courthouse by a woman she had never seen before and would never see again. The woman had spoken softly, as if discussing the weather, and had said only one sentence: "There are ways to make people disappear." The number had been written on the back of a business card from a funeral home. She had told herself she would never call it. That night, she called. The voice on the other end was calm, almost bored. "How old is he?" the man asked. 19. "Is he dangerous?" She hesitated. "Yes," she said. There was a pause. "We do not kill," the man said. "We relocate." She did not ask where. She only asked how much. When she hung up, her hands were shaking, but her mind was strangely clear. For the first time since the arrest, she had the illusion of control. 2 nights later, they came. They did not knock. They rang the doorbell once, softly, as if announcing a delivery. She opened the door without looking through the peephole. 2 men stood in the hallway. Both were in their 40s, both dressed plainly, both unremarkable in a way that felt intentional. No masks, no weapons visible. "We're here for Daniel," one of them said. She stepped aside. She went to her son's room and woke him herself. "Get dressed," she said. "Some friends are taking you somewhere safe." He sat up, confused, but he trusted her. That was the second betrayal. They did not bind him. They did not threaten him. They simply walked him out of the apartment as if he were leaving for school. Before closing the door, she handed one of the men the bag of cash. "Make sure he's okay," she said. The man looked at her for a long moment. "You should forget this night," he said. When the door closed, the apartment became unbearably quiet. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor until morning. At 8 o'clock, she called the police and said her son had been kidnapped. She cried convincingly. That part came easily. The investigation lasted 6 months. The men were never found. The money was never traced. The case was eventually declared cold. In the newspapers, she became the face of a grieving mother. In her own mind, she became something else. A savior. She told herself that prison would have destroyed him, that violence inside the system would have finished what he had started, that she had chosen the lesser evil. She moved to St. Louis, changed jobs, stopped mentioning that she had ever had a son. Years passed. She aged. The city forgot. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, 10 years later, she found a white envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was uneven, almost childish. "Mom, I'm alive. I'm not sure where I am. I just need to know one thing. Why did you let them sell me?" She dropped the letter on the kitchen floor and waited for the world to collapse. It did not. Only she did. For 3 days after the letter arrived, she did not touch it again. It lay on the kitchen table, face down, like a dangerous object that might infect her if she looked at it too long. She ate standing up. She slept with the light on. Every sound in the hallway made her flinch, as if the past had finally decided to knock. On the 4th day, she unfolded the paper again and forced herself to read it slowly. "Mom, I'm alive. I'm not sure where I am. I just need to know one thing. Why did you let them sell me?" The word "sell" had been underlined twice. She had not slept the night after receiving it. She had spent the hours before dawn reconstructing that night, frame by frame, looking for the moment where she might have misunderstood what she was buying. They relocate. We do not kill. You should forget this night. She realized, with a clarity that felt almost merciful, that she had never once asked what would happen to him after he disappeared. She had only cared that he would not go to prison. She began to search, not through the police, not through official channels. She understood too well how records worked, how easily a case could be closed and buried. She started with the number. The funeral home on the business card had closed years ago. The building now housed a nail salon. The employees there had never heard of the previous owners. She spent days in public libraries, scrolling through old newspapers, archived crime reports, forums that discussed human trafficking, underground labor networks, private detention facilities operating under false names. She discovered patterns. Young men who disappeared shortly before trials. Cases that went cold too quickly. Families who received no ransom demands, no proof of life, no bodies. She made a list. After a month, the list filled 3 notebooks. At night, she began to dream of him, not as a child, as a man. In the dreams, he was always walking away from her, his back turned, his shoulders thin and exhausted. Every time she tried to call his name, no sound came out. The second letter arrived 6 weeks after the first. It was longer. The handwriting was shakier. Mom, I do not know if you'll get this. They move us a lot. First, it was a place with fences and dogs. They said we were being protected. Then they said we owed them. I worked in a factory for 2 years, 12 hours a day, no pay. After that, they sent me somewhere else. I think Mexico, maybe further south. They changed our names. They took my papers. I only remembered your address because I said it every night for years. I'm not angry. I just need to understand. Did you know? She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where she kept old photographs. That night, she opened the box that contained everything she had hidden from herself. Court documents, news clippings, the receipt for the rope, the bag receipt for the cash, and at the bottom, the funeral home business card. She stared at it until dawn. The third letter came from a different city. She could tell by the postmark. Mom, they call this a transit center. They say if I behave, I might get released. Some men here have been waiting 10 years. I do not think they let people go. If I die here, I need you to know one thing. I never blamed you for the kidnapping. I only blame you for not looking for me. She pressed the paper to her chest and made a sound that did not resemble a human voice. The next morning, she did something she had not done in 10 years. She told the truth. Not to the police, to a man named Robert Klein, a retired journalist who now ran a small independent website dedicated to cold cases. She wrote him an email. I arranged my son's kidnapping to save him from prison. I believe he was sold into human trafficking. I have letters from him. I am willing to confess if you help me find him. Klein replied the same day. Bring the letters. She drove 6 hours to meet him. He was older than she expected, thin, with eyes that had seen too many disasters to be easily shocked. He read the letters in silence. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. You did not arrange a kidnapping, he said. You arranged a delivery. He explained things she had never allowed herself to consider. Networks that specialized in taking accused criminals before trial. Private buyers who wanted young men with no legal identity. Facilities that functioned as prisons without oversight. The men you paid probably got a percentage, Klein said. Your son became an asset. She asked the only question that mattered. Can we find him? Maybe, Klein said. But you need to understand something first. What? If we go public with this, you go to prison. She nodded. That's fine. He studied her for a long time. You're not trying to save him now, he said. You're trying to punish yourself. She did not deny it. Over the next months, Klein traced money trails, interviewed former traffickers, bribed officials in 3 countries. Slowly, a map began to form. Her son had been moved through Texas, then Guatemala, then to a series of private labor camps in Central America. The last confirmed location was a facility listed as a rehabilitation center for undocumented workers. It had burned down 2 years earlier. No official list of casualties, no survivors on record. She prepared herself for the worst. Then the fourth letter arrived. "Mom, this might be the last one. They're moving us again. There was a fire here last year. A lot of men died. I survived because I was in the infirmary. I do not know why I keep surviving. If you ever loved me, tell me the truth. Did you do this to me?" She stared at the question until her vision blurred. For 10 years, she had protected herself with stories. Now there was no story left, only a choice. For the first time since the night she made the call, she understood that saving him had never been the same as loving him. She did not answer the fourth letter. For 2 weeks, she carried it with her everywhere, folded and unfolded so many times that the paper began to tear along the creases. She read the question again and again, as if the words might eventually change. "Did you do this to me?" Every version of an answer she imagined sounded like a lie. She met with Robert Klein twice a week now, in a small rented office above a closed bookstore. On the wall behind his desk hung a map with colored pins marking places her son had been. Texas, Guatemala, Honduras, southern Mexico again. A life reduced to geography. Klein had found 3 former detainees who claimed to have known Daniel under another name. All 3 described the same man: a quiet, obedient, a physically strong, a prone to collapsing from exhaustion. One of them says he tried to escape once, Klein told her. They broke his arm and sold him to another camp. She closed her eyes. "How long can this go on?" she asked. "As long as someone makes money from him," Klein said. She finally decided to write back. The letter took her an entire night. She wrote and tore up the paper a dozen times before settling on something that felt honest enough to be cruel. "Daniel, yes, I made the call. I paid the men who took you. I told myself I was saving you from prison. I did not ask what would happen to you after. That was my crime. I am looking for you now. I do not know if forgiveness is possible. I do not even know if I deserve for you to read this. But you deserve the truth. Mom." She mailed it without rereading. 3 days later, Klein called her. "I found the facility," he said. She gripped the phone so tightly her fingers went numb. "Where?" "Northern Arizona, on tribal land. It operates under a religious charity license." "Is he there?" "I'm not sure," Klein said. "But there are men there who came from the same network." They drove together. The place was called St. Gabriel's Renewal Center. From the outside, it looked like a school. Low buildings, fences, a small chapel. Inside, it was a prison. Men worked in workshops, on farms, in kitchens. All wore identical gray uniforms. None had identification. The director, a smiling man in his 50s, explained that they were helping undocumented workers reintegrate into society. Klein showed him forged credentials. They were allowed to walk through the facility. She searched every face. Older, thinner, scarred. None were her son. In one of the dormitories, a man approached her quietly. "You're looking for Daniel," he whispered. Her heart stopped. "He was here," the man said. "They moved him 6 months ago." "Where?" "I do not know. But he left this." He pressed a small piece of folded paper into her hand. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of a woman and a boy holding hands. On the back was written a single word: Mom. She left the facility shaking. That night, she told Klein she wanted to go public. "I'll confess," she said. "Everything. The call, the money, the lie." Klein hesitated. "If you do this, the network may kill him," he said, "or move him where we'll never find him." She understood. Her confession might destroy the only trail they had. She chose silence again. The fifth letter arrived 2 months later. The handwriting was barely legible. "Mom, I got your letter. I always thought the men took me because of what I did. It was easier to believe that. Knowing you chose this is worse than anything they did to me. But I need you to know something. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because hating you is the only thing they have not taken from me yet. They say I'm being transferred to a private sponsor. They say it's my chance to start over. If I disappear after this, do not look for me anymore. Live with what you did. That will be enough." She collapsed in her kitchen and did not get up for hours. Klein tried to trace the phrase private sponsor. It led to a company in Nevada that supplied labor to mining operations. A week later, Klein called with his voice already defeated. "The company closed," he said. "Bankruptcy. Records destroyed." The trail ended there. Months passed. No more letters came. She waited. She aged. She learned what it meant to wake up every day without hope. One winter morning, 3 years after the last letter, Klein called her again. "We found a body," he said. Her lungs emptied. "A man was killed in a mining accident outside Reno. No identification, but one of the workers recognized the name Daniel from your description." She flew to Nevada that night. The morgue was cold and smelled of disinfectant. They pulled back the sheet. The face was older, hardened, scarred, but the freckles on the left shoulder were still there. She touched his arm. It was real. He had died instantly, they said. No suffering, no witnesses, no investigation. Just another undocumented worker. She signed the papers. She brought his ashes home. She buried them under a tree behind her apartment building. She did not cry at the grave. She felt only a vast, empty calm. 2 weeks later, she went to the police. She confessed everything: the call, the payment, the lie. She was charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and human trafficking. The trial lasted 3 months. The sentence was long. In prison, she became another woman with a story no one wanted to hear. Years later, on her deathbed, she asked the nurse to bring her a piece of paper. She wrote one sentence: "I did not save my son. I sold him." And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this truth was the only punishment that would never end. Prison did not change her. It only removed the last illusions that had protected her from herself. The women in her unit did not care why she was there. In that place, every crime sounded the same after a while: theft, murder, drugs, kidnapping. The details blurred into a single category called guilt. At first, she told no one her story. She introduced herself as Margaret Lewis, age 58, former office administrator. She worked in the laundry. She kept her eyes down. She followed every rule with the precision of someone who believed discipline might still redeem her. At night, she dreamed of Daniel. Not of the boy, of the man in the morgue. Always silent, always watching. Her trial had been public. The headline had appeared in dozens of newspapers. Mother who ordered son's kidnapping gets 25 years. Some articles called her a monster. Some called her a tragic figure. None called her what she knew she was, a trafficker. In the early months, she received letters from strangers, from religious groups, from women who said they understood. She read none of them. She kept only one document, her written confession. She read it every year on the anniversary of the night she made the call. I arranged my son's kidnapping. I paid the men who sold him. I lied to the police. I let the system erase him. In her third year, a young woman named Clara was assigned to the bunk below hers. Clara was serving 10 years for selling her infant daughter to pay off a debt. On the first night, Clara whispered in the dark, "What did you do?" Margaret did not answer. A week later, Clara asked again. This time, Margaret told her. She told her everything. Clara listened without interrupting. When Margaret finished, Clara said only one sentence. "You loved yourself more than you loved him." That sentence followed Margaret for years. She began volunteering in the prison library. She read books about moral philosophy, about parental love, about crimes committed in the name of protection. She discovered that her story was not unique, only rare. There were others. Parents who had sold children to traffickers, mothers who had arranged forced adoptions, fathers who had exchanged daughters for safety. Different cultures, different justifications, the same result. In her 7th year, a documentary crew requested permission to interview her. The prison administration allowed it. She sat in front of the camera, thin, gray-haired, wearing the same uniform she had worn for years. The interviewer asked one question. "Why did you do it?" She answered without hesitation. "Because I was afraid of being alone." The interview was broadcast nationally. After that, the letters stopped. In her 10th year, she received a package. Inside was a small notebook. On the first page, in unfamiliar handwriting, was written, "He tried to protect you." She asked the guards who had sent it. No record existed. She never found out. That night, she understood something she had never allowed herself to consider. Daniel had never tried to escape because he loved her. He had tried to survive because he believed she might still be looking for him. That belief had kept him alive longer than any promise. She had betrayed that, too. Time passed. Her health declined. Her hands began to shake. Her eyesight faded. She was transferred to the prison infirmary. There, surrounded by women who were dying for reasons that had nothing to do with redemption, she finally allowed herself to think about the beginning. Not the crime, the first fear. The moment she had realized that her son was capable of violence. The moment she had understood that motherhood did not guarantee innocence. She realized then that she had not tried to save him from prison. She had tried to save herself from shame, from public judgment, from being the mother of a criminal. She had chosen disappearance over truth, and she had paid for it with a life. In her final year, she began writing a memoir, not to publish, to confess. She wrote about every detail: the parking lot, the funeral home card, the rope, the silence, the lie. She wrote about Daniel as a child, about the first time he lied to her, about the first bruise she pretended not to see, about the moment she had decided that love meant control. She titled the manuscript with a single word: sold. When she finished, she gave it to the prison chaplain. "Destroy this when I die," she said. "Why write it at all?" he asked. so that at least one version of the truth exists, she said. In her last month, she was transferred to a hospital. The doctor told her she had weeks. She asked for no visitors. On her final night, a nurse sat by her bed. The nurse was young, barely older than Daniel had been. Margaret asked her one question. "Do you believe people can be forgiven for anything?" The nurse hesitated. "I think forgiveness is not the same as release," she said. "Sometimes you're forgiven, but you still have to live with what you did." Margaret nodded. "That's fair." She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Just before dawn, and she spoke one last sentence. "I did not lose my son. I traded him." She died an hour later. In the weeks after her death, the chaplain did not destroy the manuscript. He read it, and then he sent copies to 3 organizations that investigated human trafficking networks. One of those organizations reopened several cold cases. Among them was the network that had taken Daniel. Years later, 5 men were arrested. Dozens of survivors were freed. None of them remembered Daniel, but his name appeared once in a ledger. Daniel Lewis. Asset. Transferred. Deceased. The chaplain kept that page. He placed it inside Margaret's manuscript, and for the first time, the story of a son who had been sold by his mother existed not as a rumor, not as a headline, and not as a tragedy, but as a record. The world outside continued without pause. Margaret's death made barely a ripple. A short obituary noted her age, her crime, and her conviction. Some people recoiled at the headline, and most forgot. In a city that thrived on forgetting, memory was a rare currency. Robert Klein, now older, read her manuscript from beginning to end in the quiet of his office. He left the final page open, the ledger tucked inside, and sat staring at it. Daniel's name. Asset. Transferred. Deceased. Each word weighed like a stone in his chest. He remembered the letters, those raw fragments of a life trapped in someone else's system. He began to follow the network she had implicated in her writings. Arrests, raids, and trials followed, slowly, painfully, revealing the massive scale of what Margaret had set in motion. Survivors told their stories, men and women who had been moved across borders, hidden behind forged documents, forced into labor. They did not mention Daniel. He was a ghost now, the first in a line of many. Yet, Klein felt a strange sense of responsibility. Margaret had chosen him to bear witness. Perhaps she had intended for him to continue where she could not. He wrote detailed reports, compiled evidence, and submitted it to international authorities. Months passed. Klein received a package one afternoon. There was no return address. Inside, neatly folded, was a single photograph. A man, older now, muscular, his face weathered. Not Daniel, he was gone, but the man's eyes. They carried the same defiance Margaret had described in her letters. Klein put it aside. He did not know who had sent it, but he felt the weight of Margaret's hope, misplaced as it might have been. Meanwhile, the families of the other children trafficked by the network began to reconnect. Some found closure. Others found only more questions. Margaret's manuscript circulated quietly among investigators and journalists. It became a reference point, a chilling example of how fear, love, and moral compromise could collide with devastating consequences. In her final years, Margaret had often imagined a confrontation with Daniel, one where he would look at her with rage, tears, or relief. None of those confrontations ever came, and perhaps they never could. He had existed as a shadow in her mind, a constant reminder of what she had done. That shadow followed her into every cell, every quiet night, every meal she ate alone. After the network's exposure, Klein received a letter from an investigator in Arizona. Some of the records indicate a man moved under the alias Daniel Lewis did survive longer than expected. There is circumstantial evidence he was moved repeatedly and may have lived in isolated areas. We cannot confirm identity. You may wish to follow up discreetly. Klein folded the paper and placed it in the envelope containing Margaret's manuscript. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a mixture of hope and grief. Perhaps somewhere, Daniel had survived. Perhaps he had lived. Perhaps Margaret's actions had set a series of events in motion that, in some twisted way, had allowed him to continue existing beyond what she had imagined. For Margaret, that possibility never arrived. She had paid for her choices with years behind bars, with letters unanswered, with a life spent in quiet torment. But for the world outside, her confession ignited change. Authorities began monitoring similar networks. Families reunited. Some children were freed. A system once invisible began to show cracks. And yet, the emotional truth remained immutable. A mother's fear, a desperate attempt to protect her child from legal punishment, had led to the ultimate betrayal. Love had twisted into control, and control had ended in tragedy. Klein often returned to the last line of Margaret's final note. "I did not lose my son. I traded him." It was brutal, concise, and final. Those words, more than any court ruling or news article, encapsulated the moral catastrophe of her choices. They revealed the human capacity to rationalize horror under the guise of protection. They reminded him, and anyone who read them, that intention and consequence are rarely aligned. Even as arrests were made, survivors liberated, and records reconstructed, Daniel remained a phantom. A boy who had existed in the safe embrace of his mother's home, then vanished into a network that neither law nor morality had fully touched. And the ledger, with his name neatly typed, Daniel Lewis, asset, transferred, deceased. It remained in Klein's drawer, a symbol of unfinished stories, of lives disrupted, of truths too heavy to bear fully. The world had moved on, but some truths lingered. Some sins, no matter how long buried, demanded acknowledgement. Some ghosts never left. Margaret never knew what happened to Daniel in the last years of his life. She never saw the places he was taken, never knew the names he was forced to answer to, never held his hand when fear or exhaustion threatened to break him. And yet, in the quiet of her final prison cell, she imagined him every day. The day she was moved to the infirmary, her body weakened by illness and age, she asked the nurse to bring a pen and paper. Her hands shook so violently that the letters spilled across the page like scattered leaves. "I did not lose my son. I sold him." She paused, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint creak of the metal bed frame beside hers. For the first time in decades, she did not try to justify it. Not to herself, not to God, not to anyone. The truth was naked, raw, and unbearable. In her last moments, she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "I was afraid. I thought I was protecting him. But I only protected myself." Her breath slowed.
She imagined Daniel as he might have been at 19, then 20, then 25. Every age she had stolen from him, every letter he had sent pleading for the truth, every survival tactic he had learned to endure the men who had taken him, she saw it all in her mind's eye. A week later, Robert Klein received a letter, postmarked from a small town in Nevada. He opened it with trembling fingers.
Inside was a folded photograph, worn at the edges, showing a young man standing by a river, his face partially shadowed, but unmistakably bearing the same freckles Margaret had described. On the back, written in faint ink, "Mom, I found my way." Klein did not know if it was Daniel or someone who had taken his identity. Perhaps it was a final act of survival, a message sent across time to reach a mother who could no longer act. Perhaps it was a cruel trick by the network, a phantom hope that would vanish in the next mail. He held the photo in his hands and placed it carefully inside Margaret's manuscript. The manuscript became a record, a testament to fear, love, and the unforeseen consequences of desperate choices. Investigators, journalists, and historians would read it for years, each drawing lessons about morality, legality, and the fragility of human life. Yet for Margaret, the ultimate truth remained hidden. Daniel's final fate, whether he survived, escaped, or perished in the hands of those who had sold him, would never be known. Her actions had set in motion events that no apology, no confession, and no hope could undo. And that was the final horror of her story. A mother's love, twisted by fear, had created a ripple that could not be contained. A life intended to be saved had been bartered, transferred, erased. A boy she had once held in her arms became a ghost in the ledger, a phantom in letters, a shadow in the world he had never asked for. Margaret's final words lingered in Klein's office, in the minds of those who read her manuscript, in the silence of abandoned facilities where children had been moved like pieces on a chessboard. "I did not lose my son. I traded him." The ledger remained open, the photograph tucked inside, a reminder that truth does not always bring justice, and survival does not always mean freedom. And somewhere, out of reach of courts, investigators, and mothers, Daniel, or the man who had become him, continued to exist, carrying the weight of a childhood stolen, a mother's fear, and the cruel gift of survival.